Here's a shocking truth most Americans won't hear on the evening news. When President Donald Trump announced that U.S. forces had blown up a boat in Caribbean waters this Tuesday, killing 11 human beings, he wasn't just conducting a routine drug bust. He was potentially committing an act of war. But here's where it gets controversial, and why this moment should terrify anyone who understands the dark patterns of American history in our own backyard. Trump's administration quickly labeled the deadly operation as a successful strike against members of the notorious Tren de Aragua gang, claiming the vessel had originated from Venezuelan waters. Yet for those familiar with the blood-soaked legacy of U.S. military adventures throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, this incident carries all the hallmarks of something far more sinister than a simple anti-narcotics operation. And this is the part most people miss. Mysterious explosions at sea have a way of reshaping American foreign policy in ways that benefit the military-industrial complex. Cast your mind back to February 15th, 1898, when the USS Maine erupted in flames within Havana's harbor, claiming the lives of over 260 American sailors. Despite never establishing the true cause of that catastrophic explosion, American media outlets seized upon the tragedy's ambiguous circumstances to point accusatory fingers at Spain. The resulting public fury became the perfect fuel for what we now know as the Spanish-American War. Within mere months, the United States had fundamentally altered the power structure across the entire Caribbean region, a stranglehold on influence that persists to this day, even surviving challenges during the tensest moments of the Cold War. But here's what should make your blood boil. The recent maritime strike carries identical ambiguity to that century-old incident. U.S. officials rushed to release grainy, unclear footage of the explosion, but these blurry images fail to demonstrate who exactly occupied that doomed vessel, what activities they were engaged in, or whether any illegal narcotics were actually present aboard the craft. The White House has provided zero concrete evidence proving the deceased individuals held membership in any criminal organization. According to reporting from the New York Times, Pentagon leadership was still scrambling on Wednesday to determine what legal justification they could present to the American public for this extraordinary military action conducted in international waters. However, for a commander-in-chief who has publicly declared his intention to pursue our manifest destiny, this deadly strike represents just one scene in a much larger theatrical production already underway. This worldview, deeply rooted in 19th century expansionist ideology that also drove the conflict against Spain 127 years ago, continues to treat the entire Western Hemisphere as territory awaiting American control and domination. And here's the really insidious part. The so-called war on drugs provides the perfect cover story for modern American interventionism. Never mind that the United States remains one of the world's most profitable drug markets. Fighting trafficking operations has proven incredibly beneficial for American military expansion abroad. Plan Colombia funneled billions of dollars into militarization efforts that directly fueled massive population displacement and widespread bloodshed throughout that nation. The Merida Initiative coincided with record-breaking homicide rates and systematic human rights violations across Mexico. Throughout the Caribbean basin, counter-narcotics operations have consistently served as convenient justification for expanded U.S. naval presence, including the current deployment of multiple warships positioned strategically off Venezuela's coastline. But here's where the timing becomes absolutely critical, and why experts are rightfully calling this strike a clear violation of international law. Trump has constructed his entire political comeback around projecting overwhelming American strength on the global stage, and Venezuela presents an ideal theater for such demonstrations. The United States has positioned more than 4,500 sailors and Marines throughout the region, supported by 7 major warships patrolling Caribbean waters. Characterizing this South American nation as a narco state provides perfect justification for military force. energizes Trump's political base and sends an unmistakable message to the entire region that Washington still expects to dictate terms to Latin American governments. And this is where the messenger becomes as important as the message itself. Standing firmly behind Trump's aggressive approach is Marco Rubio, who holds the distinction of being America's first Secretary of State of Latino heritage. While defending this controversial decision to reporters in Mexico City on Wednesday, Rubio declared that instead of interdicting it on the president's orders, we blew it up, and it'll happen again. He argued that traditional seizure operations fail to deter trafficking organizations, adding with chilling certainty, what will stop them is if you blow them up. The president is going to wage war on narco-terrorist organizations. Rubio's inflammatory rhetoric reflected less of a coherent policy framework and more of a calculated political posture. His words embodied the confrontational Cuban exile politics that have consistently pushed Washington toward aggressive intervention throughout the region. Dynamics that Rubio, as a longtime Florida senator, understands intimately. This posture definitely resonates with specific audiences, particularly within U.S. Latino communities. Analysis from the Digital Democracy Institute of the Americas reveals that online discourse among U.S. Latino communities this week continues to be dominated by escalating U.S. Venezuela tensions, with prominent social media accounts driving narratives of imminent military action and growing calls for Maduro's Venezuela to be designated a narco-terrorist state. Here's an inconvenient truth that challenges the official narrative. Venezuela doesn't actually produce significant quantities of cocaine compared to other regional players. However, the New York Times reports that U.S. indictments and leaked Colombian records describe Venezuelan security forces as overseeing drug shipments worth billions of dollars. Predictably, Venezuela has expertly leveraged this incident to portray Trump and the United States as aggressive Yankee imperialist warmongers. While Nicolás Maduro lacks widespread popularity, this left-wing authoritarian leader possesses deep historical knowledge and knows precisely how to weaponize it for political advantage. Maduro characterized the U.S. military buildup as threatening the entire region and issued warnings that he would declare a republic in arms should American forces cross into Venezuelan territory. As far-fetched as such escalation might appear, the Trump administration continues ramping up tensions rather than pursuing de-escalation. Historical precedent demonstrates how rapidly situations like this can spiral completely out of control. The main incident in 1898, U.S. troop deployments in the Dominican Republic during 1965, Grenada in 1983, Panama in 1989. Each military intervention was initially framed as defensive action, yet each culminated in full-scale American military intervention. This week's deadly strike carries identical risks, wrapped in remarkably similar justifications. But here's the question that should keep every American awake at night. Are we witnessing the United States once again deploying a tragically familiar playbook to justify actions that will ultimately destabilize an entire hemisphere? With Latino communities within the U.S. now serving simultaneously as both amplifiers and targets of this dangerous narrative? The fundamental issue isn't whether a corrupt, authoritarian figure currently leads Venezuela. That's beyond dispute. The real question centers on whether the United States is repeating historical patterns by using well-worn scripts to justify military actions that have consistently brought chaos and suffering to our neighboring nations. This week's maritime strike constituted nothing less than an act of war. Pretending otherwise requires willfully ignoring historical precedent and deliberately blinding ourselves to what the United States has repeatedly inflicted upon Latin America and the Caribbean for over a century. If we're genuinely serious about learning from past mistakes, we must have the courage to identify this incident for exactly what it represents. So here's my challenge to you. Do you believe this strike represents justified action against criminal organizations, Or does it follow the same dangerous pattern of American interventionism that has destabilized our hemisphere for generations? Are we watching the opening act of another military adventure disguised as drug enforcement? And most importantly, will we allow history to repeat itself? Or will we demand accountability before this situation spirals beyond our control? I want to hear your thoughts, especially if you disagree with this analysis. The stakes are too high for comfortable silence.